It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
When I think about how much control should we maintain, it's a process of consistently letting go as the kids get older, but letting go with the conversations.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the founder of happyfamilies.com.au and Channel 9's parental guidance parenting expert and co-host. I'm here with Kylie, my mum to our 6 children.
My mum.
Thank you. I don't know how that... Somebody trained
Do you
in the...
need mothering today, my honey?
Psychodynamic theories would say that was somewhat Freudian, Freudian slip. I don't know where that came from. My wife and the mum to our 6 children and my, what would you say? My speech picker-upper. The person who notices all the stuff that I say that doesn't come out quite right. I'm tempted to start again, but we're already in, so let's just keep going. Today, as we do every Tuesday, a conversation about helping families who are having a hard time. If you are a Happy Families Premium member, you get to ask questions consistently through the membership. We do a monthly Q&A, but we also answer those questions on Facebook in our Happy Families Premium Members group and on the podcast right now. That's what we're doing with this podcast this morning, and this one's about social media. We talked about TikTok last week, and didn't that go off? On social media, it's been going bonkers. We've had emails going everywhere, podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au, and one of our listeners has said, hey, Justin and Kylie, how much control should we maintain when it comes to kids and screens? Time limits, downtime at night, asking for permission to download and delete apps, no Safari, checking messages, so much pressure to get it right. These are the questions that are coming up among my friends and I as our children are heading into the teenage years and wanting more independence with phones and the internet. So many questions and fears we're doing it wrong.
And she would be just one of millions of parents who feel exactly the same way.
Every single day. Because social media, I mean, we talked about it last week. I don't want to downplay the severity of this. TikTok is so dangerous. More so than many of the others. But all of these platforms have the same kinds of content. They have the same sorts of opportunities for our kids to be exposed to horrendousness, whether it's explicit material or coarse material or vulgar material or harmful material. It's there. And parents are right to be worried about it. Like every now and again, some people will say, oh, Justin, you're a bit soft on the whole social media thing because you just say you got to teach the kids. Well, that's because they're going to see it regardless. I wish that we could actually somehow protect our kids. Them up. Yeah, totally. And we'll talk about that in this podcast. But the reality is parents are worried about it because whether you do it or not, they're still going to be exposed to it. They're still going to find it. They're still going to be sneaky. And we can talk about that as well. But when you hear that question, Kylie, what's the first thing that goes through your mind?
I think about that proverb. Is it a proverb?
I don't know. Not until you tell me.
Maybe it's a quote.
Okay. See, there we go. No. Now we can correct each other. This is exactly what this is why the podcast's here, folks. I think listen to Kylie and I argue about grammar and the way we speak.
But give a man a fish and he has food for a day.
Ah, yeah.
Teach a man to fish and he has food for life.
I'd call that a proverb.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, we'll go with it.
But anyway, when I think about this idea of control.
Yes.
As parents, us wanting to control our children, we're essentially giving our children fish. We're just doing the thinking for them in order to keep them safe.
Yep. And it's understandable. We want to keep our kids safe and we have an obligation to do so.
100%. And it's easy.
Yeah, it is.
It's so easy to make the decisions as adults with clarity of thought and recognizing and seeing all of the dangers spread out before us to make decisions and want our children to just follow suit. But when our children find themselves in positions where we are not next to them, when we are not looking over their shoulders, what skill sets do they have to navigate the challenges that they see on the bus, in the school playground, at their friends at a sleepover? They don't know how to navigate this stuff. And so we actually, in some ways, disadvantage them in being able to navigate this more safely. Are they going to be exposed? Almost 100% yes. They are going to be exposed to things that you wish that they never knew, had never seen. As a parent, it's a reality. And as much as we would love to bubble our kids, and we have been through this so many times where we just wish we could.
We're going through it for the
literally
5th time now. 5th time, one to go.
Pull them out of everything and
Yep.
just keep them locked in a bedroom.
Yep.
Don't talk to anyone. Don't listen to anything. Don't look at anything.
And stay away from screens.
It's not real life.
No.
So the opportunity we have as parents to not control but to teach is time consuming, heartbreaking and hard work. And like you said, we're now going through this for the 5th time. But it makes such a difference in the relationship that we have with our children, in our capacity to hear their concerns, their worries, their fears, and how it makes them look if they are the only child who, doesn't have social media.
As our grade 7 daughter keeps on reminding us.
And what they see is appropriate use. And we just get to have this dialogue with them that is so much more powerful, because when we're not there, that dialogue can continue.
There's that metaphor. It's not a proverb. It's a metaphor that I use all the time. And that is that you can fence the pool, but you can't fence the ocean. So from a social media and screens perspective, what that essentially means is, you can have all the rules in the world. You can have all the protective layers. You can have all the security and all the filters and all that sort of stuff that you want on your devices at home, your screens at home. But your kids don't stay at home. They don't go swimming just in your swimming pool.
Yeah.
They also go swimming in the lakes and the rivers and the oceans and their friends' pools and that kind of thing. And not everywhere that they go, not every body of water that they go near is going to have those same fences around it. And therefore, we've got to teach our kids to swim.
Yeah, we can't throw our hands up in the air and just go, this is all too hard, and not have parameters.
Yeah.
But having complete control over what our children do is not going to help them either.
Righto. So after the break, I'm going to walk through a model that I think is going to be helpful for any parent who's going through these kinds of ideas and struggling with these kinds of challenges. The model comes from a researcher at Brigham Young University. Her name is Laura Walker, and she's one of my favourite researchers. Done some really, really smart work around adolescence and also around the concept of how we can develop discipline frameworks. That's coming up next on the Happy Families podcast. Get curious, not furious. Be where your feet are. Mistakes lead to mastery. High emotions, low intelligence. Have you ever heard these or any of the other principles I share and thought, I need to stick that on my wall? Well, now you can. The Happy Families team has pulled out the best Justinisms for A5 mini posters. Perfect for your home or even the classroom, and easy to grab at happyfamilies.com.au.
It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And I'm interested in this framework.
So I've talked about this before, probably on the podcast, but I don't do it very frequently, and it's really, really useful. So if you've got a child who, social media is coming, screen time is coming, and that's every child, by the way, this framework will be useful. The way that it begins is right at the very beginning of life, where we cocoon our kids. And now some people say, we don't want to cocoon our kids, we don't want to bubble wrap them. Well, that's not actually true. Research shows that if we don't bubble wrap them and cocoon them, especially early in life, they start to feel like the world is scary, volatile, unpredictable, random, and can hurt them. And so when our kids are little, they actually need to be literally bubble wrapped, spoon fed, cotton wooled, and looked after, because they're helpless. And that's for the first, I'd say at least the first half a dozen years of life. We're supposed to be there as a protection for them. We give them little bit by little bit more and more scope to explore and get curious and discover their limits and take risks. We do that as they're growing, but ultimately our job as parents, particularly when it comes to the stuff like screens and social media, is to absolutely cocoon them, bubble wrap them, protect them from it, and don't let them near the media. It's not good for them.
So when I hear you talk about cocooning, I go straight back to being that, young mum with this beautiful baby, freshly born, and wrapping them in swaddling, wraps, and they're all nice and cocooned. And at that point, there's no fight, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're really happy to be cuddled and snuggled and swaddled. But we're now talking about preteens and teenagers who do not want to be mollycoddled. They do not want to be bubble wrapped. They do not want to be saved because they don't think there's anything to be saved from.
Well, they actually know that this stuff's dangerous. They just don't think that it's going to be dangerous for them.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that in a sec. We're jumping ahead too far in the developmental
I apologise.
timeline. No, that's okay. So after cocooning comes this thing called reasoned cocooning. And reasoned cocooning is where you basically explain to your child why you're bubble wrapping them. And this is what happens from about the age of 2 or 3, through to somewhere around the age of 7, 8, 9. Somewhere in there.
So mummy doesn't want you playing with the pots on the stove because it's hot
and you'll burn yourself. Or by the time they get to 8 or 9, I know you want to have Instagram like all your friends, or I know you want to be on TikTok like all your friends, but there are some reasons that we don't allow you to do that. And what you can do with your kids up until about, I'm going to say the age of 10 or 11, is you can actually literally cocoon them. You can protect them, you can keep them away from stuff, full stop, end of story. You can use your power as a parent to do that. Now, I don't think that that's healthy by the time we get to 9, 10 and 11, and that's why the cocooning and the reason cocooning, that sort of overlaps through that period from 0 to 3 or 0 to 4, and then from about 2 or 3 through to 8 or 9. But what happens from around about the age of 5 or 6, and you'll note again there's overlaps through each of these stages as we progress through life. From about the age of 5 or 6 through to about the age of 15 or 16, we step into this area that we call prearming. So prearming is where we say to our child, here's what's coming up in your life. So when they're going into grade 2 or grade 3, you might talk to them about coarse language, vulgar language, explicit language, and how kids at school are going to start using swear words. And if you're in a home like ours, well, we don't use those sorts of words in our home. And so you say to the kiddo, have you heard kids using swear words already? Okay, and how does it make you feel? Why do you think they're saying them? What do you do when you hear those words? Would you think that it's ever appropriate to use those words yourself? And so you're pre-arming them by talking them through hypothetical scenarios before they get there. As they're going into grade 5, you probably have an initial conversation about something like pornography, because we know that the average age of exposure to pornography is about age 11. And so you want to have that conversation just ahead of time. As they're going into grade 6, you start to have conversations about social media. Grade 7, you start to have conversations about alcohol. Grade 8, you start to have conversations about other drugs. Grade 9, you start to have conversations about intimacy and those kinds of things. So the conversations are always pre-arming. We're getting in ahead of the curve. We're giving them hypothetical situations. We're saying, hey, this is coming up in your life. What do you think you want to do about it? What do you think is the right thing to do about it? How can I support you with it? So we've gone from cocooning when they're little to reason cocooning as they're getting older. Now we're pre-arming them. And that pre-arming obviously overlaps a bit with cocooning. But as our kids move into their early adolescence, from about the age of 12, we start to step into this thing called reasoned deference. Now, when you defer to somebody, you say, well, what do you think? That's what deference is. I'm deferring to you, Kylie. Let me defer to you. What do you think we should do here? Kids are not ready for deference, but they are ready for reasoned deference somewhere between, I'm going to say, 8, 9, 10 and 15, 16, 17, depending on what the context is. You're not going to say, well, what do you think when they say, can I go to the party, and they're 12, right? But you are going to maybe reason with them. Maybe you'll still bubble wrap them at that point. Who knows? You might cocoon them. But these processes are the important part. And as parents, we've got to be discerning as to where we're up to with the developmental trajectory of our kids. So you cocoon, then you reason cocoon, then you pre-arm, and then you get into reasoned deference. Reasoned deference basically is, you know what? I want to leave this one up to you. But before I leave this up to you, let's have a conversation about it. Let's reason together. Let's work this out. Let's come up with a solution that makes sense to both of us. Ultimately, you're making the decision, but you're doing it with a whole lot of my support, my scaffolding, my involvement. And then the last part of the model, the last part of the process is deference. And that's usually somewhere around the age of 17, 18, 19. Sometimes it might be a bit earlier. Sometimes it might be a bit later. It depends on what you're deferring. But deference essentially is when the kids come to you and say, can I? And you say, well, guess what? You're a big kid now. I'm going to leave this one up to you. I trust you. I believe in you. I want you to make safe, healthy decisions. Fill your boots. You work it out. And that process requires a lot of us as parents. It's a tricky process. But guess what? Being a parent requires a lot of us as parents. It's hard work. So when I think about this particular listener question, how much control should we maintain? It's a process of consistently letting go as the kids get older, but letting go with the conversations, with the cocooning or the reason cocooning, with the pre-arming, or the reason deference, or eventually the deference. What do we do about time limits? Well, again, it's about that process. Early on, you're not going to give them open slather, but by the time they're 18, you're probably not going to step in at all because it's their life. What do we do about downtime at night? Well, when they're little, you absolutely set those limits. You get into the app and you set up all of the downtime and screen time limits because they're little, because they're only 12 or 13 or 14. And as they get older, you start to shift. Asking for permission to download and delete apps is the next one that was on that list. Well, guess what? You encourage, in fact, you demand that they ask permission in the early days, but as they get older, you start to work through a reasoned deference process with them. Checking messages, no Safari. All of those ideas, they all tie in with this general process. bubble wrap the kids like crazy, cocooning, and then explain why you're doing it. Then pre-arm them, then start to defer to them, but with a lot of reasoning, support and scaffolding until finally they're old enough that you can say, hey, guess what? I've done the best I can to train you. You're a big kid now. This one's on you. And obviously with screens, it's different to with parties, which is different to driving, which is different to boyfriends and girlfriends, which is different to schoolwork, which is different. Do you know what I mean? Like every context is different, but the same framework, the same developmental trajectory applies. You're looking at me with a funny look like, are you ever going to stop talking?
No, not at all. I'm thinking about the conversation we had last week where I just shared that one line from your book, 9 Ways to a Resilient Child, in the fact that autonomy supported parenting is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard work. And we feel like we've had this conversation. Why do we have to have it again? But we're going to have the same conversations with our children as we work through this process over and over and over again. But it's that idea that you've been sharing recently about practice. This is helping our children to practice new skills so that they can utilize those skills in profoundly more appropriate ways as you defer more and more authority to them in their choices.
So let's wrap up with one last idea. What do you do when the kids get it wrong? What do you do when you defer to them? Or we go through a reason deference process with them and they still get it wrong? We need to highlight they will.
They're going to get it wrong.
Yeah, like we get stuff wrong all the time. And so what happens when we get stuff wrong? We say, I've learned, I'll do better next time. And that's what we do. We sit down with the kids and we reason with them. We empower them. We have conversations with them. We say, what went wrong there? What did you learn from it? What will you do next time? Do you think that you're ready for us to give you that responsibility again? Because kids only learn responsibility by being given responsibility. If you take the screens away, if you take responsibility off them, guess what? They're never going to learn how to do it. They're never going to learn responsibility because you're not giving it to them. It's about giving it to them in the right context. So for the listener/listeners, the many people who have asked this question about how we're supposed to get this right, I hope that this has been a useful podcast. I feel like I've just shared some really important information that can make a huge difference in the way we approach parenting. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about making your family happier, we'd love for you to join us at happyfamilies.com.au.